Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 601, and today's date is February 25th, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. is now in the final stages of having its society closed down. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand Greece and the Eurogroup, they've come to an agreement. Actually, the Eurogroup kind of wrote everything up, and they're agreeing to all the demands and everything that the Syriza party is putting out there. And we see that the Syriza party might have folded to pressure. But they have a bigger problem. You have to remember, Greece has a huge amount of debt. Yes, they have the 4 months where they're getting another tranche of emergency loans. But the thing is, as they were continually building up debt over time, and more people were losing their jobs because of austerity, the debt can't be sustained. And we have proof that this doesn't work. I mean, if we look at each and every one of the countries throughout the Eurozone and in the United States, in Canada, we see the debt is continually piling up. We see that the interest on the debt is continually rising, and the revenue is disappearing. I mean, look at Greece, for instance. The Greek people owe their government about 76 billion euros in unpaid taxes accrued over decades. The government says only 9 billion euros of that can be recovered. With most of the rest lost to insolvency, Syriza is now making tax collection a top priority. But there's going to be a problem, because the people don't have the money. They don't have the money to pay. And let me tell you, if they come down hard on these people, there is going to be a revolution, and that government is going to be kicked out. The entire system cannot be sustained. And we've been saying this for quite a long time. And this is proof that, yeah, you see, when you take away the jobs, when you make people live on the streets, the amount of revenue coming into the government is non-existent. Yes, you can keep taking debt on, but what happens is you don't have the revenue. It is happening here in the United States. The government is continually bringing on more and more debt, and they can't cover the payments with the revenue that's coming in. And this is why they're creating all these different programs. FATCA, Obamacare, who knows, a carbon tax if they keep going on with climate change, which we know is completely fake, phony, and false. But as we can see, they're going to continually try to bring in more revenue until the very end. They will tax everyone, bleed them dry, until they have nothing left, and the whole thing will start crumbling apart. And this is when they're going to start the war. Actually, a little bit before that, because they don't want to be blamed for what is coming. And here in the United States, we see that, yeah, things are getting worse. More and more companies are laying off. HP, by the end of this year, they're going to let go 58,000 people. I mean, that is a lot of people. And throughout this year, all these people are going to be without jobs. Modus Link Corporation going to lay off another 320. Viacom, they are preparing for layoffs. We don't have the number yet. Tenaris Conroe Mill, they have suspended their operations. They're laying off 230 people. JP Morgan Chase, they're going to close 300 bank branches, which is going to put people out of work. And again, when all these people are out of work, where do they go? And we're not even including the retail stores and all the small mom and pop shops that are closing all around the country. And all the other major corporations that have been laying off since the beginning of this year, last year. I mean, the jobs that are being created are part-time, low-wage jobs. So let's get this straight here. People are being laid off at the higher paid level. They can't find that work, and the only thing that's available to them is the lower paid jobs, part-time. This is why we are a part-time nation. And this is why we're seeing the automobile automobile industry in trouble. This is why they had to open up the subprime market. We see the real estate industry in trouble because they had to open up the subprime market and allow people to put 3% down. If you go with a new home, most of the time, the builders will make up the 3% and even pay for your closing costs. And we can see they're trying to create an illusionary recovery by pumping everything up. But again, when you take all this junk and you throw it in, it completely cannot be sustained. I mean, think about it. Take a building, for instance. If you create a building and use subpar concrete and steel beams, what happens to the building? It comes tumbling down. Right now, there is no foundation here in the United States. And we can see that this, over the long period, it cannot be sustained. It can. It's impossible. Yes, the corporate media and the government, they can convince you that it can, but we've seen over in the past, it cannot. Now, I see all over the corporate media, they're telling us that new home sales have beat expectations in January of about 481,000. They expected only about 470,000. But you have to remember, they're using the Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, Fannie Mae, I said that backwards, program right now. We have a lot of free money out there from investment companies, hedge funds, foreign investors who are paying in cash. And when we look at this, and they continually tell us that things are okay, why are mortgage applications continually declining? The week ending February 20th, we see mortgage applications fell another 3.5%. Refinancing applications fell 7.5%. I mean, if the real estate industry is so great and it can just go off on its own, raise interest rates. Go ahead, let's see what happens. They're a little afraid of this. And if the real estate industry is doing so well, why is U.S. home ownership rate at its lowest rate in the last 20 years? Think about this for a second. It makes no sense. Who's purchasing these homes? I mean, we see all these layoffs. We see stores closing. We see 80% of the college graduates, they can't even find good paying jobs. They're taking the part-time work. Now, we understand, and we've been following this, the Baltic Dry Index has dropped to around 524 points. Actually, it moved up a little bit, 8 points to 524. But it's in this area where it has been in this lowest area since August of 1986. I mean, this is absolutely awful. And it is having an effect on dry bulk shippers. A third dry cargo shipper has filed for bankruptcy this month, following a collapse in freight rates to historic lows in what shippers call the worst market conditions since the 1980s. South Korea's Daibo International Shipping Company filed a court receivership, basically bankruptcy. And we can see right now, this will not help the economy whatsoever around the world. It is completely falling apart. Now, Janet Yellen, she is freaking out about this audit the Fed bill. Janet Yellen is very alarmed that some members of Congress want to conduct a comprehensive audit of the Federal Reserve for the first time since it was created. And you have to remember, if the Fed is doing everything correctly, they wouldn't have a problem with an audit, right? Why would they stop it? Let them come on in. Everything is by the book. But we know it's not. What are they trying to hide? Yellen is out there and she's insisting that the Federal Reserve is too important to be influenced by the American people. And you have to remember, the Fed is a private corporation. It's not part of the government whatsoever. And they don't want their information audited because they're doing things that are not in the best interest of the American people. Actually, there is no reason to have the Fed whatsoever. Rand Paul is pushing this bill, the Audit the Fed bill. And we understand the Fed is in it for themselves. You have to remember their product is debt. And this is what they push around the world. And if we look at every single country, we see they are in a huge amount of debt, including the United States. Yellen was out there and she said, I want to be completely clear, she said. I strongly oppose the audit the Fed. I don't want this to happen. Yellen argued the audit measures would allow politicians to second-guess the Fed's decisions, which in turn would weaken the central bank, and the ultimate victim of that process, she said, would be the U.S. economy. Really, basically what she's saying is she doesn't want anyone poking around to say, hey, what is going on here? Oh my God, you're stealing money from the American people. You're giving it to other places. You're taking it for yourselves. This is all being filtered up to the Rothschild. Yeah, they don't want that out there. They don't want anyone to know what is really going on. So what is she really concerned about? I mean, really? Are they trying to convince us they're doing everything in the best interest of the people? Well, they are not. And the Federal Reserve has been around for over 100 years right now. And it has done an absolutely abysmal job for the American people. I mean, if we look at a couple of things here of what they have done over the many years, we can see that it's not working. It's not working for the American people, and there's no reason to have the Fed. I mean, we like to think that we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people, but the truth is that an unelected, unaccountable group of central planners has far more power over our economy than anyone else in our society does. The Federal Reserve is actually independent of the government. 100% of the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are private banks. The U.S. government owns 0. The Federal Reserve is not an agency of the federal government, but it has been given power to regulate our banks and financial institutions. This should not be happening. According to Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Congress is one that is supposed to have the authority to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. So why is the Fed doing this? In 1963, President John F. Kennedy issued the Executive Order 11110, which authorized the U.S. Treasury to issue United States notes, which were created by the U.S. government directly and not by the Fed. And then he was assassinated. And they tried to retrieve all of those notes from the market. The Federal Reserve has become so powerful that it is now known as the fourth branch of the government. The greatest period of economic growth in the U.S. history was when there was no central bank. The Federal Reserve was designed to be a perpetual debt machine because that is their product. The bankers that designed it intended to trap the U.S. government in a perpetual debt spiral from which it could never possibly escape. A permanent federal income tax was established the exact same year the Federal Reserve was created. This was not by coincidence. It was done on purpose in order to pay for all of the government debt that the Federal Reserve would create. Today, the U.S. tax code is 13 miles long. From the time that the Federal Reserve was created until now, the U.S. dollar has lost 98%. Since the Federal Reserve was created, there has been 18 distinct recessions or depressions: 1918, 1920, 1923, 1926, 1929, 1937, 1945, 1949, 53, 58, 60, 69, 73, 80, 81, 90, 2001, 2008, and we have the Great Collapse coming very soon. Without the Federal Reserve, the subprime mortgage meltdown might not have happened. According to the official government report, the Federal Reserve made $16 trillion in secret loans to the big banks during the last financial crisis. The mainstream media has sold quantitative easing to the American public as economic stimulus to help the American people. But guess what? The percentage of Americans that have jobs because of this economic stimulus is non-existent. Actually, they've gone down since quantitative easing first began. Thomas Jefferson once stated that if he could just add one more amendment to the U.S. Constitution, it would be a ban on all government borrowing. The borrower is the servant of the lender, and the Federal Reserve has turned all of us into debt slaves. Now, if you'd like to read more about this, this is from the website endoftheamericandream.com, and you can see the rest of the points they made about the Federal Reserve. Now, we understand that the United States government, NSA, spies on all of the American people. They have backdoors in almost every single electronic product. And we're starting to see blowback from other countries where they're saying, you know something, we don't want your hard drives, we don't want your processors, we don't want your operating systems. And we see China has dropped Apple, Cisco from their state purchase list. This is going to hurt the economy. This is not going to make it better for the United States. Actually, the NSA, by doing what they're doing, and forget about violating our rights, they are hurting the United States economy. And plus, they're violating everyone's rights, and especially the Fourth Amendment. Now, we understand that the U.S. government has secret black sites around the world. And we talked about, from Naomi Wolf, the 10 steps to close down an open society. And we find out that there's a black site in Chicago which violates all of your rights. Located in a nondescript warehouse on Chicago's west side is where, according to The Guardian, one can find the domestic equivalent of a CIA black site, an illegal off-the-books interrogation compound used by Chicago Special Police Units, one of which renders Americans unable to be found by family or attorneys while locked inside. A place whose former occupants say is where you end up when you are disappeared. It brings to mind the interrogation facilities they use in the Middle East. When you go in, no one knows what's happening to you. It's a Guantanamo, in short. It is a place where U.S. Constitution and basic human rights have absolutely no access. What are they able to do in these black sites? Keep arrestees out of the official booking databases, beating by police resulting in head wounds, shackling for prolonged periods, denying attorneys access to the secure facility, holding people without legal counsel for between 12 and 24 hours, including people as young as 15. At least one man was found unresponsive in a Homan Square interview room and later pronounced dead. When a Guardian reporter arrived at the warehouse on Friday, a man at the gatehouse said, "Listen, you can't enter here, and we can't answer any questions. This is a secure facility. You're not even supposed to be standing here," said the man. And he wouldn't give his name. The real danger in allowing practices like Guantanamo is the fact that they always creep into other aspects. They creep into domestic law enforcement, either with weaponry like the militarization of police or interrogation practices. This is how we ended up with the black site in Chicago, and I don't believe this is the only one. I'm sure they're all over the country. Because we have to remember, and I discussed this in episode 583 on February 4th, 2015, if you'd like to go back to that. You understand, and I discussed this way before, and I follow up on this every so often to see how close we are where the U.S. government is closing down the U.S. society. And we have to remember, number 2 of the 10-step list of closing down an open society says, create a gulag. Once you have got everyone scared, the next step is to create a prison system outside the rule of law. An example, an American detention center at Guantanamo Bay. It's completely outside the rule of law, and they can torture, they can do whatever they want. At first, the people who are sent there are seen by the citizens as outsiders, troublemakers, spies, enemies of the people, or criminals. But you have to remember, they're not convicted of anything, they're suspected. but they're being held. Initially, citizens tend to support the secret prison system. It makes them feel safer and they do not identify with the prisoners. But soon enough, civil society leaders, opposition members, labor activists, clergy, journalists are arrested and sent there as well. Black sites, gulags in history tend to metastasize, becoming ever larger and more secretive, even more deadly and formalized. Then the black sites appear inside the country, where they hide them and people just kind of disappear. And we are seeing that we are heading down this path. And when we reach, and when we talked about each one of these points, we're starting to realize, yeah, our society is being closed down. And it's getting worse as time goes on. It is not getting better. And we basically are at the final stages of closing down the U.S. Look what they're trying to do. The next phase is to stop the flow of information. This is one of the things they're trying to do. And that is with the FCC, where they're trying to lock down the internet, regulate it, control it, shut down those sites that speak against what the government is trying to put out there. And that is their propaganda, because under the Smith-Mundt Act, which was an Amendment 114, which was a rider on the NDAA, Section 501, it says the United States government can use propaganda on the American people. And now they're trying to shut down the flow of information. They want to control it. And we see right now there's black sites appearing in the United States. And if you think there's only one in Chicago, think again. We're going to see many of these pop up all over the country. They're all over the world, where CIA runs them because they're outside the rule of law. Now, out in England, we see there are 2 British police officers who tried to recruit student activists to spy on their campaigning peers. They're under investigation right now for alleged misconduct. The internal probe by Cambridgeshire Police follows allegations that officers repeatedly approached students in a coercive manner, eventually causing them to give up their campaigning. Gee, you think this was done on purpose? I do. Students report they felt stressed and paranoid after the encounters, with some giving up their political activities. A 23-year-old single mother alleged police threatened to prosecute her if she told anyone about their attempt to recruit her as a mole. This is going on in all countries right now because they're trying to squash those people who want to speak up, and they want people in the inside to basically shut them up. She told The Guardian she stopped anti-racism campaigning and was left feeling violated, isolated, vulnerable, and paranoid. Kai published a report critical of UK police surveillance of political groups in 2013 and has continued to monitor the Cambridgeshire allegations. Their surveillance of protesters is raw, unvarnished intimidation and activist busting, he said. It's the antithesis of democracy. Well, around the world today, we really don't have democracy because everywhere we look, we see every single government trying to hamper free speech. They don't, even though they're out there marching, we want free speech, what they're trying to do is they're trying to shut it down. And you can see it, and it's totally obvious on the internet, where you have the alternative media, new media, and especially when a story comes out, they try to shut down different channels. They try to block certain things. They take down websites with attacks. They have trolls around the internet to try to convince everyone, no, don't be on this channel. Listen to the corporate media. It's better. They do this a lot to try to sway the conversation, but it's not working, and they realize it's not working. Guess what they're doing now? They want control of all the information. They want to say, okay, you can listen to this person, but you can't listen to that person. They want to make the decision. They want to issue the licenses. And if you apply for one, you might not get one because they said so. And we can see this is what they're trying to put forth. In Turkey, they're coming up with new policing laws. In the wake of recent political tensions in the country, the government decided to revise the existing laws for the prevention of crime and terror activities. The preamble of the bill states the government aims to deter violence in mass demonstrations as well as protect public order. Basically, they're going to come down hard on all the protesters. That's really what it means. They're going to detain these people, put them into prison, and basically they're going to be infringing on their rights to protest, because they don't want the people out there. And we see every single country doing this. And of course, when we had that march in France, most of the countries there, they block freedom of speech. They don't want democracy. And we can see this is self-evident from what these countries are doing. Now, out in Afghanistan, we understand the United States government central bankers, they told us that they're going to be bringing the troops out. But now, since that bilateral security agreement was signed by the new president, which John Kerry helped get elected, by using his influence, we see that troops now are going to be brought back into Afghanistan. They're going to ramp up on the troops in there, because already we have warnings about the Islamic State. And we can see there is warnings from the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan that there are threats to Americans in Afghanistan, and everyone has to be aware of this. So it's an emergency message coming out from the U.S. Embassy, and you can see that things are definitely getting worse in Afghanistan. Actually, the United States is making it look like it's getting worse so they can bring troops back in, and this was their plan all along. I mean, look what's happening in Iraq. We're back in there again, and we know why this is all happening. Now, out in Ukraine, we see that the gas supplies to Europe could suffer maybe in 3 to 4 days. Why? Well, Kiev hasn't paid its bill. The advance payment for gas supply made by the Ukrainian side will be in place for another 3 to 4 days. If there is no further prepayment, Gazprom will suspend supplies under the contract and its supplement. Of course, this could create a certain problem for gas transit to Europe, to our European partners. And we can see right now Europe has been taking steps because they're very nervous about this. And we know eventually, once that gas pipeline is built going through Turkey, they're going to shut down the valves in Ukraine. And Europe is going to have to get their gas going out from Turkey to Greece and then out to Europe. But don't worry, the European Union has decided to turn to alternative gas suppliers. And this is like Algeria and other countries because of what is happening. Now, Ukraine's economy is completely collapsing on itself. And right now, Kiev has introduced rationing as their entire economy falls apart. Ukrainian supermarkets have imposed rationing of basic products after the drastic fall in value of the hryvnia. The currency has lost 70% of its value, causing people to stockpile food and buy electronics as a hedge. Restrictions apply for goods such as cooking oil, flour, sugar. Ukraine's news agencies UNN reports Wednesday that retailers may sell no more than 2 bottles of sunflower oil and 2 packs of buckwheat per customer. And depending on the store, from 3 to 5 kilograms of flour and sugar. Bread, rice, potatoes, meat, milk have not yet been rationed. But we can see it is definitely getting worse in Ukraine, and we should look at this and understand what's going on, because it's going to happen here in the United States. It's going to happen throughout Europe. When the entire system collapses, we are going to see the same thing. We're going to see hyperinflation. We're going to see the cost of goods skyrocket. Actually, the value of the dollar is going to decrease, because what's going to happen is all these countries who are selling the oil are no longer going to sell the oil using the dollar. And once this happens, the rest of the world is going to say, why do we need this dollar? Why are we holding it? And they will send it back to the United States. They don't need it in their reserves. And we will have a flood of dollars here in the United States. And it will look like everything's going up in price, but in reality, with all these dollars coming back, the value of the dollar will be decreasing. And it will take more and more dollars to pay for those goods. And this is what we see happening in Ukraine. And if these people were prepared and knew that this was going to happen, they would have all their food and everything else stockpiled, like we should be doing today. Now, the Kiev police have been tightening security because there are supposed to be anti-government protests in Ukraine. And actually, they've bussed in about 20 buses with National Guard fighters. They've been stationed all around Kiev. And we can see that the people are sick and tired of the government. And this is why we can see that there could be another coup in the works to get rid of the government that exists right now, the puppet government from the United States. And we heard many people come out and say, yes, it looks like there could be another coup. And this one is going to be by the people, not by a ginned up coup d'etat, which was controlled by the United States. This will be a grassroots coup by the people, and they will throw out the government. And we can see protesters were throwing Molotov cocktails at the building. Major police and National Guard forces were deployed there. The demonstrators demanded the dismissal of all government ministers and officials related with military security and law enforcement. The activists were all arrested, and they tried to storm the building, but it failed. This doesn't mean it's over. This means it's just beginning. This means that the people are sick and tired of the draft. People are sick and tired of having no gas to heat their homes. People are sick and tired of rationing, of having their value of their money destroyed. They're sick and tired of going after family members in the southeastern region of Ukraine. They're sick and tired of war. Ever since the United States and the EU came into Ukraine, it has all gotten worse for the people. The bankers, they've been stealing money. They've been pocketing gold. They've been taking the loan money and pocketing portions of it for themselves. Because when push comes to shove and this government's forced out, these people are going to leave with a lot of the IMF money, and the people are going to be left with the debt. They're the ones who are going to have to pay all this back. Look at Greece. Look what the government did. And the people are sitting here like, no, this is enough. We don't want this debt anymore. This wasn't because of us. The government was in league with the EU and with Goldman Sachs. A lot of this was done illegally. But it doesn't matter at this point. And the people, the only way to get rid of it is for the people to rise up. That's it. They have to push the government and push them hard and say enough is enough. And you can see that governments, they don't want to leave. They want to stick with their power. Even if the people are there saying, listen, we don't want this anymore, they will fight to the bitter end. Because governments don't want to give up their power. Now it looks like in Ukraine, the eastern Ukrainians, the southeastern people, they have withdrawn about 400 units of heavy armaments. And the OSCE has confirmed this, saying yes, they are withdrawing their heavy military assets from the front lines. But the OSCE, they're a little concerned about what Kiev is doing. They're saying that they're not pulling out their heavy armaments. Ukrainian military are keeping silent for the time being. They're not pulling out heavy armaments. And they're saying, you know what, we can't do it right now. We have problems, logistical problems. They're making up all different kind of excuses of why they can't do it. Well, we know why they can't and why they won't. Because they're getting ready for a major offensive. They're bringing in more and more weapons. NATO, the US, they're bringing in troops. More paid mercenaries are flooding in to the Ukrainian forces. They're getting ready for a major offensive. This is a breathing period to see how things would go. They didn't go very well, and they realized they need more weapons. They need the US, the NATO, and paid mercenaries intertwined into their forces, and this is what's happening right now. Now, out in Poland, we see the Polish FM is calling for more sanctions against Russia. We see John Kerry, David Cameron getting together, talking about sanctions. We see Poland is doing this. Kiev is calling for sanctions. And Russia, in the meantime, is trying to work out the ceasefire deal. The only country, they came up with a peace plan. Nobody else did. Think about that for a sec. And we can see that they don't want peace, these central bankers. They want war. They're pushing war, and they will not stop. Now we see that the United States is basically laundering weapons into Ukraine. Because right now, as we know, the president hasn't decided that if they're going to bring in lethal weapons to Ukraine. So what they're doing is they're using different methods of bringing weapons in. They're taking weapons through Abu Dhabi. So the U.S. is selling it to the United Arab Emirates, and Kiev is purchasing them. And the U.S. is circumventing its own proclaimed policy of not delivering weapons to Ukraine. Basically, they're laundering weapons through Abu Dhabi. That's exactly what they're doing at this point. Now, out in Estonia, the NATO member Estonia, they held a military parade in the border town of Narva, just 300 meters from the Russian border. And of course, this is to flex their muscles, and they were doing this on Estonia's Independence Day. Now, why is NATO there, the U.S. doing this on their Independence Day? It should be the country doing it, but we see that they have other agendas. About 140 pieces of NATO military hardware took part in the parade, including 4 U.S. Armored Personnel Carriers, M1126 Stryker Flying Stars and Stripes. And I have a video posted on the x22report.com site, and if you want to take a look at that, you can. Now, we all know the United States, Canada, Russia, they're all fighting for the Arctic. They're trying to get up there because there's a lot of oil in the Arctic. They're trying to set up a strategic military bases in this area, and they're all trying to conquer this area right now. And it is a race to get up to the Arctic and to establish bases, oil drilling, before another country does. And we can see the Russian defense minister says the Arctic turning into a center of hydrocarbon production. That every single country is going to be fighting for this area. And again, a lot of these countries like the United States, Canada, Russia, it's also a strategic location where they can launch missiles into the other country. Because as we know, and as Putin knows, and the central bankers already know this because they're pushing war, everyone is preparing for World War III. Russia and Cyprus, they're making military deals, financial deals, and we see that they're talking about military technical cooperation, and it looks like they're going to be signing 11 documents, including a joint program of action for 2014 and 2017 through 2017, intergovernmental agreements on cooperation in the fight against terrorism, illicit drug trafficking, and military cooperation, as well as several interagency memorandum in military science and investment spheres. Again, Russia is out there. They're setting up, making sure they have certain areas where they can dock ships, land planes, have the cooperation from the countries, because they understand, he understands, the central bankers are pushing war. They're bringing in military assets into Eastern Europe. They're already there in the Middle East. They're down in Africa. And we can see that also the pivot to Asia. And he's starting to realize that we better start making deals, military deals around the world. China's doing the same thing. While they're making economic deals, they're making sure they are protected because they know exactly what is coming. Now, out in the Middle East, we see the Yemen people. They have taken over a U.S. trained Special Forces Army base in the capital city. And, of course, you know, the United States, England, France, they're all saying, let's have some political agreement here. Let's talk about this, because what's happening is the people are taking back their countries. And these people, they don't want to talk to the U.S. government, central bankers, or any other country, because they had enough with them. Most of the people are speaking out saying, yeah, we don't want them here at all. And of course, the United States is trying to go through the UN. They're trying to do whatever they possibly can, but they know this is not going to work. So their next step is to invade each and every one of these countries. And we see this coming, and it's getting closer and closer. We see right now the UN Security Council extend Yemen sanctions because of all the violence that's going on. It's basically because they don't have the puppet government in place. The same thing in Libya. And we know that the Islamic State is the proxy army for the UK, Israel, United States, and other countries. I mean, Iraq's army shot down 2 British planes as they were carrying weapons for the Islamic terrorists in Al-Anbar province. The Iraqi Parliament's National Security and Defense Committee has access to the photos of both planes that are British and have crashed while they were carrying weapons to the Islamic State. The senior Iraqi legislator further unveiled that the government in Baghdad is receiving daily reports from people and security forces in Al-Anbar on numerous flights by the U.S.-led coalition planes that airdrop weapons and supplies for the Islamic State. Well, we knew this, but here we have confirmation once again that they are supplying the weapons. And they've discovered, when they found the weapons, that these were U.S., European, and Israeli weapons. They're saying that they're using the Islamic State to cause havoc in the region, chaos in the region. And this is what we've been saying all along. This is what the Islamic State is for, because they have to divert your attention from the actual people rising up in each one of these countries. That's all it is. And then they're going to use them to get into Syria. Why do you think their territory expanded by 3 times in Syria? We can see they are getting ready for a major offensive, and we know one is coming this spring because they have announced it all over the place, where they're going to be going into Mosul. Basically, they're going to try to take back Iraq from the people. That's what they're going to try to do. Then they're going to take the forces, move into Libya, move into Lebanon, and then go down into Yemen. And when it's all said and done, they'll be moving up into Syria, because they need to go wherever the Islamic State is. And this is the bill that's trying to get passed with the authorization of war, where they want to go wherever the Islamic State is. And once that's passed, however they're going to do it, with some type of an event to convince Congress, you will see a huge amount of forces pile in to each one of these countries. I mean, right now, they are bringing in hundreds of thousands of ammunition magazines, 10,000 M16 rifles, hundreds of Hellfire missiles into Iraq, because they're getting ready for a war, a major war. Kerry is out there, and he's pushing Congress for more money. He knows the authorization for war bill is still being looked at, voted on. Congress is not really leaning towards it. But he wants non-military efforts. He wants funds so he can buy so he can buy non-military assets. We know what's going on here. They need more money to help with the war effort. They're getting ready for the big one. This is going to be the big push to get into Syria, to get into the other countries. This is where they are headed, because they realize the entire system is falling apart. I mean, yesterday I reported on that Libya, the Islamic State in Libya, has chemical weapons like sarin gas and other type of chemicals. But what's funny is, you go back in time to February 2014, the United States and Libya in the past 3 months have discreetly destroyed what both sides say were the last remnants of Gaddafi's lethal arsenal of chemical weapons. So let's see, they destroyed the weapons back in February of 2014, and now they're telling us that the Islamic State found chemical weapons inside Libya. So were they lying then, or are they lying now? Doesn't really matter, because they're both a lie. They can't even keep track of their stories anymore. And now what they're doing is they're telling us that Boko Haram and the Islamic State are merging together. It is a marriage from hell. So we can see they're going to also try to get into Africa. This is going to be the biggest offensive in the Middle East, North Africa, that you have ever seen. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of troops in this area. And eventually, when they try to get into Syria, what's going to happen is Russia and China are going to get involved. And this is where things go south. they're also going to try a major offensive in Kiev this spring. So we can see this all happening together because they need to start a war. They've been trying to provoke all these countries. They haven't done anything. They're trying to convince the American people, and they're trying to convince them that, yes, these are the countries that are evil. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, and other nations. But we know what's happening here. They're provoking all of these countries, and they haven't gone along with it. So now they need to do it to make it seem like these countries have done something, and that's a false flag. And you have to remember, the American people, they're not going to just say, oh, let's go to war. No, they're going to have to convince them to go to war. And how do they do that? By a terrible event here in the United States. This will cover up the collapse and allow the people to say, yes, we want to go to war. This is what they're going to try to use. This is their last-ditch effort. And this is when we have to say, no, enough is enough. And we have to talk to as many people as we possibly can and say, listen, this is completely made up by the U.S. government. They want war. They want us to go fight for them because their system is collapsing. But guess what? We don't need them. We don't need the central bankers. We should get rid of this U.S. government and replace them for a government that works for the people. And if they can't, they're out too. The time is almost here. It's getting closer. You can feel it. Listen, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.